feet and footwear. Why should you care? Have you ever dealt with anything like plantar fasciitis, ankle, knee, hip, or back pain? Give me a thumbs up, Jeffrey, if you've had any of those, or
Back pain, definitely.
not great. I was going to say great, but not great. That's never fun to deal with. Um, if you also want to improve your athletic performance, if you want to understand how the foot works, how it impacts your whole body's movement, then this level up is for you. So I'm just going to teach you a bit about the anatomy and the biomechanics of the foot, and then go over the brief history of how footwear is being designed, and then and how it's affecting our feet at the moment, and then some options. So that'll be pretty much everything. See how we go, the timing. So the anatomy of the foot, it's pretty complicated, to be honest. There's a lot of things going on. 26 bones, 33 joints, over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. Super complex. There's a whole field just for fixing feet, and that's very warranted. But that complexity allows for stability and flexibility, which is super essential for the way we walk on two legs. Not many animals are bipedal and walk on two legs. So yeah, just want to make it as simple as possible today. So if we divide the foot into three main sections, there is the forefoot, midfoot, and the hindfoot. And so the midfoot is a pretty important one. Acts as the foot's arch and a bit of a shock absorber. So we talk about the gait cycle. Humans are walking creatures. That's our most common action. We walk everywhere. We go through a cycle called the gait cycle, and there's two main phases in that. There's the stance phase, which is when the foot is in contact with the ground, and that's the first half here, that blue foot. And what am I reading? Swing phase, there we go, which is when it's in the air, and that's that last part over here. So during the stance phase, the foot pronates, which means it rolls inward, and that is just here. Can you see my mouse, Jeffrey? Yep, cool. So pronation is when your foot rolls inward and there's a few things going on, but basically your arch should flatten a bit. And then it absorbs shock and it helps adapt to the terrain. So walking on grass, dirt, things like that, it's very adaptable to whatever you're walking on. And then it supinates and rolls outward over to the right, and it becomes a rigid lever where the arch elevates and it allows us to kind of push forwards, and there's a lot of things going on there. So the arch is a really crucial part of the foot, distributes body weight and absorbs impact through each step. You can kind of think of it like a spring where it just compresses and then releases energy with each step. How are we going so far? All good? Cool. So, big toe and glute connection. So the plantar fascia is a really important part of the foot, and that is this little band here. It's a thick band of tissue that runs along the bottom of the foot, and it prevents the collapse of the arch when we load it with our body weight. And so the big toe plays a big role in activating something called the windlass mechanism, which you can think of as a little well. So basically pulling a lot of weight with not a huge amount of stuff. So yeah, big toe, it tightens the plantar fascia and then creates a rigid lever for push off, and that allows for full hip extension. So basically that's your torso and your legs. Full hip extension would be like that, basically getting straight, and then hip flexion would be folding forwards or not being completely upright. Yeah, so it's a pretty complex process. There's a lot going on that goes from the foot all the way up to your hips, but it is a pretty amazing process as well. So if we go into the history of the modern shoe, I think it's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've got a few graphics. Kind of wanted to show you what things we've sort of come from. But if you think about like ancient times, just basically thinking about how do we protect our feet. As we went more medieval, that's where fashion started to become a big focus. And so the more length and curly and pointy shoes they were sort of seen as luxuries that you could have, more material to be used in that sort of way. Yeah, and so from there, we've been moving over to the Industrial Revolution, more mass production, and that has kind of followed on, like the focus on fashion and pointing shoes. Also, arch elevation. So the more pointy and more elevated shoes were, more fancy you'd kind of seen as. So those are kind of things that have carried over all the way into the 20th century, all the way through to our athletic shoes, which have many of those same design features. And you potentially, if you go to this gym, you probably would agree that we're kind of in a bit of a reversion back to where natural footwear is being forefront at everyone's mind. So like barefoot is pretty big at the moment, but we'll talk about that in a sec. So modern footwear. These are a couple of graphics from Scott University. I think you probably might have seen something from Jeffrey. But modern footwear, what does it do? Stops our toes from splaying. So if we look at this bottom right picture, puts the bones and muscles into a very unnatural position, compresses nerves. And so over a long period of time, many years, can lead to lack of activation in certain muscles. That can lead to weaknesses. And then that can also create imbalances all the way up the chain through the hips. So sounds pretty doom and gloom. Depends, I guess it really depends how much it's affecting you. But the other thing is that most shoes will elevate your heels. And so that's done with a heel to toe drop, where the heel will be higher than the toes. That's usually with a lot of cushioning as well. But that changes the way that our weight's distributed through our feet and through our hips as we take a step. So by raising the height of your heel, you put more pressure on the hips and the knees. And so those joints start taking a lot more load. And if you just think thousands of steps every day, it's like repetitions, you're constantly putting more pressure on joints that aren't necessarily designed to take that. Makes a lot of sense why we might be ending up with knee issues, hip issues, ankle, all that type of stuff. Alrighty. Some common problems that might be arising. Yeah, I tried not to choose the real feet pictures because they're pretty gross, but these are pretty informative. So bunions is kind of a bony deformity at the base of the big toe, and it just pushes your toe into the other toes. Very common for females that wear high heels a lot or have throughout their life. They're really aggressive point at the end. But yeah, generally tight fitting shoes can be genetic, but certain gait patterns and foot types can also lead to that. Pretty painful to wear shoes comfortably. Plantar fasciitis over here is it's inflammation of the plantar fascia, and that is usually can be a variety of things, but overuse, improper foot mechanics, maybe obesity, or super tight calf muscles, which would be a flow-on effect from potentially shoes that are keeping you in a tightened calf position. Sharp heel pain, very painful, not fun. Had a few clients had to work through it. But yeah, last one, hammer toe, where the toes this has just got one, but I've seen plenty of pictures with people like all 5 or 4 of them all really cramped forward like that. And it's that middle joint that sort of starts bending. Tight shoes again is a big cause. And it can create, I think you can imagine that the imbalances that would be caused by not letting your toes extend all the way up. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, so that's some pretty nasty ones. People have had to deal with it, and I mean, yeah, podiatrists have to treat this all the time. But how can we avoid getting these? Some other factors as well that people would make. Sizing, super important. Even what doesn't really matter what shoe you're wearing, but shoes that are too small, definitely going to be the big one that can cause those things. Constricting the toes, and then the toe box not being big enough for your toes, and then also too big shoes. So having your feet slide around, not going to provide a lot of stability. Yeah. What else have we got? I can't see it. Fashion over function is probably just the big one. So things that are, especially high heels, are pretty bad for that. I think everyone's kind of heard how taking off your high heels, super relieving because of how much discomfort you're putting your body in, really shortening your calf muscles for depending on how long, like a whole work day if you're wearing them at work. But also neglecting arch support. If you've got really high arches or really flat feet, having something like arch support can be really important. Using worn out shoes, really good test for that, probably on the prowler. If you find yourself slipping with load that you feel like isn't your max load, then potentially it might be time to upgrade and get some shoes with a bit more grip. And just ignoring your own foot characteristics. If you've got wide feet, narrow feet, just buying a shoe because it's the new one or because someone else wears it might not be best for you. It's super important to get your feet checked and know what shoes will fit you best and support your foot. So, barefoot shoes, are they the magic pill? They're pretty hot right now, and potentially for a really good reason. They feel really good. Most people that jump into them tell me that they love them, feel really good. I wear them all the time when I'm in the gym, and I think that they do really allow for a lot of cool things. But are they the solution, the magic pill to all your problems? Probably not. So what do they allow for? Zero drop. So it just means that you've got the foot being able to do its full function. So it's not elevating the heels. So the foot has to go through the full gait cycle. There's no shortening anywhere there. Thin sole also allows for better or full contact sensation to the ground. So more reception, more feedback from the ground. Can be quicker reaction time, more things going on. We want to feel things going on. We don't want to be damping the ground with a lot of foam. Unless we'll talk about running. But toe splaying is the other one. So allowing your toes to spread, super important. Like we showed before, narrow shoes are going to really cramp those down. And that's going to allow better muscle activation, everything to sit in the place that it's meant to. Some limitations, they won't magically fix your feet problems, especially biomechanical variations like flat feet, high arches, bunions, things like that. They're not going to instantly fix them by just wearing those. And they're not right for every situation. So running, intense movements in sport, things like that, those are going to be things that do require more cushioning, more stability, support, things like that. If you're a kid, you might be able to get away with going barefoot your whole life, but most of us have worn traditional shoes through our lives. So trying to go back to put all that load and demand on our body, it's probably going to either take years of practice and dedication to getting there, or just choosing the right thing for the right job and where you're at. Yeah, and the other thing is probably just the modern world that we live in, which is mostly flat, very hard surfaces, are not built for our bodies and for us to walk on. Really, well, it makes it much easier to walk on, but it's not designed with how our feet work in mind. Our feet are designed to undulate, so respond to uneven surfaces. If you've walked barefoot, grass, sand, dirt, you'll notice that it probably feels really good and natural. So yeah, just, that sort of analogy, that thought process of the flat ground just meaning thousands of reps that are exactly the same. So if you're constantly doing thousands of steps with your heels elevated, it's thousands of reps that are putting your knees under more pressure, and that's got lots of flow-on effects there. Okay, so potentially a better alternative, wide toe shoes. So could be a better alternative, I think so, for day-to-day activities like walking or running or just kind of standing in them. Depending on the brand, they also don't have any heel elevation, so you're not tipped forwards. That's going to be fantastic, but they do have a wide toe box. So there's a few out there. Ultra is one of the brands there for running. Birkenstocks, they're pretty popular these days. I think the past few years they've been selling out like hotcakes, but they're super comfortable for people that chuck them on. Other things like Crocs, there's plenty of things out there that mainly have a wide toe box and don't have you tipping forwards. Are really good options for standing in all day, but still providing some cushioning. And cushioning is really important to support your ligaments, tendons, and your joints from repeated impact on hard surfaces, which we're not really designed to take. When you're running, the ground reaction forces multiply your body weight by 2.5 to 3 times. And so that ends up with things like your calf muscles taking up to 8 times more body weight than when you're just walking or standing. So if that's sort of that disparity of, if it's a lot of force, if you haven't trained yourself up, it's super important to not jump too quickly into things there. One sec, there we go. Okay, so lifting shoes. These are pretty cool little tool. They're pretty much elevation of the heels, but they're for a specific use case, which is lifting. Usually your big 3 lifts, your deadlifts, not your deadlifts, sorry. Your squats is probably the big one here, and a few of the weightlifting lifts. But they allow more range of motion in the knees specifically and the ankle, which puts more load into the quads and allows for a more upright posture. That can generally take some pressure off the low back as well, depending on if you don't have great biomechanics. It's a really good aid and tool, but it's super important to not use these as a pure compensation for lack of ankle mobility. And so while it does improve the biomechanics of the lift, it's not really the be-all end-all. It's always a good goal to be able to squat with good technique without any elevation. Your body might not allow you, but working on that, you can also just use wedges to elevate or plates to get very similar result. Yeah, awesome. Regular shoes. Just want to make a clarification that they're not necessarily the enemy. They can actually definitely increase performance, especially if you think about sport-specific shoes, basketball shoes, tennis shoes, running shoes, athletic track shoes, things like that. Another important thing is they allow you to not stand out in social settings. Dress shoes, obviously really important in social functions, work, things like that. It is pretty jarring to be walking around just wearing these sort of duck flip-flops. So that's a pretty important thing to think about. But yeah, it's really important to still address weaknesses and balances that you might have. A good analogy would be thinking about a lifting belt in the gym. It's a great tool and aid to help you do more potentially weight or keep you safe. But it shouldn't come with the compensation or not using it before you're ready for it. So doing plenty of core strengthening and making sure you're safe are super important. And then you use that after to allow more weight rather than kind of using it really early on and just kind of skipping all the hard work there. So it's the same sort of idea where it's put them on, use them for performance, race day, but the training should really focus on doing the basics, getting your feet strong, getting your toes strong, all those sorts of things. And speaking of, a couple other things that you can do, we've got toe yoga and toe strengthening, foot strengthening. So calf raises, fantastic. Really love them when you're barefoot. You get a lot better feeling. You really feel like your arch, your foot has to work, especially thinking about pushing through the big toe. If your toes are really tight and you can't, one thing to practice, you might not be able to do it depending on what shoes you're wearing now, but lifting your big toe and then lifting your 4 other toes individually, super important. If you can't do that, it's something that is definitely worthwhile practicing. And you'll kind of notice after a few sessions of that, it burns firstly, but you'll feel a lot stronger in your feet, like better activation through a lot of exercises in the gym when you're pushing through the ground. These little white things here, toe spacers, super cheap, but they can also help you just to start to splay your toes out, especially if you're thinking about getting barefoot shoes for in the gym as a training shoe. It's a good combo to kind of be using these at home, just walking around really gentle to start helping you expand those toes back to where they should be. But yeah, that's a couple of things there. Most importantly, want to make sure that you choose what feels best and most comfortable for you. Best way to do that is to try on as many different shoes as possible. So don't limit yourself to what you know, but go out there. There's plenty of places around us that have barefoot shoes, have runners. That most places will, not most, but there's a few places that will do analysis of your gait pattern, tell you if you pronate too much, if you've got flat feet, those types of things, and then help you choose a shoe that's really suited for you. And if you try on a few, you'll probably be able to find something that feels comfortable. yeah, that's that one there. Keep working on those balances. And then finally, in summary, foot is very complex, but it's capable of lots of different things. Modern footwear hasn't been designed for optimal foot functionality, but neither has the modern world that we live in. And so balance is probably the best option. And I really recommend choosing the right shoe for the right situation, not just blanket wearing your runners to everything there. That is going to do it for my presentation. Jeffrey, any questions?
Oh, definitely. With the barefoot shoes, like I've noticed, if I do a single leg RDL with a dumbbell, I take my shoes off and my balance is a lot better. Is that something to do with?
Absolutely, yeah. What shoes do you normally wear what shoes are you taking off?
Boring old runners?
Yeah, so it's very similar. It's that idea of the runners, a lot of cushioning, probably a bit of heel elevation. Depends what brands, they'll have different levels of heel to toe drop. Usually it's from 4 to 12 mils. But the cushioning it really acts like almost like I call it like swimming in your shoe, where you can't ground properly. So your intrinsic and extrinsic muscles in the foot don't get to engage properly. Your toes can't splay. So if you think about a tripod or a triangle, the wider the base is, the more stable it's going to be. If you have a really narrow triangle like that, it's going to be super easy to push over either side. If you have a really wide triangle, so your heel here and your toes here, that's going to be easier to push over than that. And then in terms of activation, yeah, especially pushing through the big toe makes a really big difference. Like next time you go out, if you think about keeping your big toe pressed down, especially the big toe knuckle, which would be there on your foot, can make a really big difference in terms of activation. You might feel a lot more activation running up your leg through the hamstrings and through your glutes. But yeah, that's a super common one. That's why generally if people are comfortable, I'll try to get most people to do single leg balances, single leg, pretty much anything that's single leg or balancing. Step ups are really good to do in socks or barefoot, whatever it is. Yeah, does that answer your question? Do you want to
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to give a recommendation if you don't want to, but not in terms of brands or anything. But you know, there are lots of people at the gym similar to me doing kind of strength training, not doing anything kind of ridiculous or training for a competition or anything like that. Would you recommend generally the kind of stuff that I do and a lot of the other members do, having barefoot shoes? Would you? Over something like I'm wearing these runners, but I don't run.
I generally would. I think yeah. I generally would. I think there's not too many. I can't think of any situation inside this gym that you would be better off having runners than having either socks or barefoot shoes. Unless you've got some specific injuries or use cases and you've been like advised to wear runners or something like that. But the more flat you can get and the more generally the closer to the ground you can get, to the less cushioning in here, I'd 100% advise, like my personal preference for my clients is to get a pair of barefoot shoes. The other thing is wet wear and tear. Like if you just buy a pair and you have them just for the gym in here, you can just kind of keep them they'll last you ages because they won't wear that fast. So you'll be able to get a lot of use out of them. But in terms of strengthening pretty much the whole chain from all the muscles in your feet, calves, and then up through your glute, you probably really notice it. But like if you wanted to sort of get a feel for it, instead of going socks, go barefoot because you'll have a bit better grip, and just try going through like a full workout and see if you like the feeling. But it just means you can come in, feel pretty confident that your feet aren't stinking up the place, and that you've got a bit of grip for like the things like the prowler. And like when you're doing calf raises, you can really feel your feet, your calves working. You can push through the big toe, all those types of things there. Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, of course.
I've got a list on my phone. So what about, because I notice a lot of people do this as well. I do like zone 2 on the treadmill, which is kind of 75% max heart rate, kind of like a moderate walk. Would you switch over to a pair of runners, or just leave the barefoot shoes on? Because you're not, it's not running, it's not intense, it's just kind of a moderate pace.
It's a good question. It's yeah. So barefoot, like if you went into barefoot with that, I personally wouldn't wear barefoot because I'd probably feel really sore depending on the amount of time. I've been wearing this for like 3 years, and I think I'd probably be fine. But if you did get a pair, I would like you really want to take it slow rather than go too quick into it. And so things like just walking, sorry, just like standing around in the gym and like short distances to walk to start off with would be fine. But if you try to do like even a low intensity, like 3 to 5 kilometer walk, I reckon you'd pull up pretty sore. Like your calves would be super tight, just because it's not used to, firstly, that much contact with the ground. Like it does feel pretty jarring. It takes a few months at least of like walking on hard surfaces to kind of dull the sensation because you're not used to feeling that much. But yeah, in terms of here, probably a pair of runners would be good. Something like the Ultras. There's a few brands out there that have like a wide toe box but still have the cushioning. Would probably be like my gold standard. But if you've got comfortable runners and they work and you don't feel like they're too restricting, I think probably that sort of steady state cardio is probably either fine with what you've got, or at some point you could probably get something with a little bit more toe spread there. So yeah, so Ultra I know is good because they've got the cushioning. In terms of barefoot brands, Vivo Barefoot, obviously. There's quite a few good ones out there now that aren't too expensive because the Vivos are pretty expensive. Seguero is another good one. Let me just see how to spell that. Seguero shoes. Seguaro. Anthony has a pair of those, and they seem to be really good for like, I think less than $100. We do have a partnership with Soul Mechanics in Brighton at the now. So if you head to them, it's just Soul Mechanics. They do full foot analysis, so they've got all the fancy tech there, and you get a discount. I think it's 15% if you tell them you're a member here. I think I got an email from them saying that until 3 days away that you get 20%. I'm not sure if that's only online, but so if you're planning on heading up to Brighton in the next few days, just mention that you're a member here. Otherwise, if you buy online, we have a discount code as well, and you can just ask for that if you want it. Yeah, but they have heaps of brands in there, so you can try on quite a few and like see if you like any. Obviously, no obligation, but you get a good idea of what might be a good option to start with and like where to go from there.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no worries. Anything else?
Nope.
Cool. What was your biggest takeaway, if any?
I think you've convinced me that it's worth looking into. That's for sure. I don't really have trouble with my feet, but on the other hand, I want to avoid having trouble with my feet as well. So
yeah, absolutely. If you want, like, it's probably not. I don't know how interesting it is to other people, but there's a really good podcast from Peter Attia. Had a guest on. It's about a 3-hour podcast just on the feet. So I can't remember what her name is, but she does a really good job of convincing you that barefoot shoes are pretty much the holy grail. I think probably a bit more, but I personally sit on a bit more of the balanced fence. I think there's quite a few scenarios where it might not be the best, but like it's a super interesting podcast. You learn heaps. It's 3 hours, but if you want, just ask me and I'll find it and send it to you.
I listened to Peter Attia, but I haven't heard that one. I might check it out.
It's probably 2 to 3 months ago. I'll have a look and I'll let you know when I see you next.
Right. Thanks, Ethan.
No worries at all. Thanks for sitting in, Jeffrey. Appreciate it. Always good to see you, mate. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.
You too. See ya.
Yeah.